Welcome. I'm your host, Pam Schmiel, the editor behind hempbeveragenews.com. Austin Stevenson has worked inside some of the most rigorous quality infrastructures. He spent time at Eurofins Scientific, a pharmaceutical-grade testing lab, was one of the co-founders of Vertosa, a leader in cannabis infusion technology, and now leads revenue at ACT Labs. We talk about why labs are critical R&D partners in beverage development, not just compliance checkpoints, and what can go wrong when they're brought in too late. Austin breaks down the science behind emulsions, stability testing, packaging considerations, and the unique challenges of keeping cannabinoids consistent and stable in water-based beverages over time. He also shares insights on overlooked factors like can liners, oxidation, nitrogen flushing, and how added cannabinoids and functional ingredients can complicate formulation and shelf life. Let's welcome Austin Stevenson to the show.
Yeah, no problem. I'll give you a little brief background on myself, cannabis, hemp, and just kind of my professional career. So, really, I've been in and around cannabis, hemp testing, infused products for nearly a decade. I started at Eurofins Scientific, where I helped launch and lead the hemp CBD business unit. That gave me an early look at how complicated this category can get when you combine, fast-moving products, innovation with, very fragmented regulatory and real consumer safety questions. So I led during the 2018 Farm Bill the business unit that launched CVS's program on hemp products. And so while at Eurofins, literally on the same day that I told CVS that they could not launch any of their beverage products because they were all failing potency and stability tests, Ben Larson, the CEO of then Nanogen, now Vertosa, came to me and said, hey, I met this PhD chemist. He's turning cannabis oils into nano emulsions for stable beverages. And I said, this is kind of serendipitous because I literally just told CVS that they couldn't launch any of their beverages. So the universe must be telling me something. I am from Missouri, the show me state. So I said, show me the tech, let me test it. And ultimately passed my test at the internal lab at Eurofins. And I came back to them and said, all right, well, Ben, you're an operator. Harold, you're a scientist. Do you have, commercial lead? Do you have any traction? Do you have any revenue coming in? And the answer was no, maybe a couple $1,000s that they did on a pilot. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to tell my boss that I'm going to jump into some more entrepreneurism. And ultimately, after Eurofins, I co-founded Vertosa with Ben and Harold. I was the third co-founder. So you can say that. And that's where we really worked on cannabinoid infusion technology starting in 2018. Particularly at that time, it was just emulsions and ingredient systems for beverages and edibles. And that experience alone really shaped how I think about hemp beverages now, because it showed me firsthand that getting cannabinoids into a beverage is one challenge, but keeping them stable, keeping them consistent, keeping them accurately dosed, and ultimately consumer ready over time, and that's the key piece, over time, they got to sit on retailer shelves, is a whole different level of complexity. And so that's why now today, after I was fully vested from Vertosa, I started a family, took some time off, told the guys, hey, you guys got this. We got it to a point that is sustainable and growing well. I'm going to sit back as a board advisor and start my family. I now got 2 kids, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And after about a year, a little less than a year off, my old boss at Eurofins called me and said he became the CEO of a private equity-backed multi-state cannabis testing lab, ACT Lab, and he needed someone to drive commercial because we needed to get the lab profitable, growing, and expanding. So talked to my wife and said, I'm going to jump back into cannabis, back into the testing framework. So that was in 2024. So today, now at ACT Lab, I'm really looking at the category from the testing and quality side. Our role is really just to help brands more than anything prove that prove what they built in R&D still holds up through production, through packaging, through distribution, shelf life. That's key, and ultimately, the end consumer use. So, I get excited and passionate about beverages. That's why you still see so many beverages on my wall, and these are all things that have been infused with all different type of cannabinoids, all different type of ingredients. Because at the end of the day, I'm a products guy and passionate about this space, passionate about the people making them, and and at the end of the day, it's all about at testing, formulation, compliance, product quality, and the most important thing to me is consumer trust, because we just want to bring and ensure that good product get into consumers' hands, and we all have a role in that, including yourself, but just bringing awareness to the category.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that's a big part of like a lab's work is in the R&D process is making sure their formulation is stable, and all that kind of stuff is something that somebody has to invest in, I guess, for in there. Yeah. Because who knows what, So maybe that's a good way to start with, what type of I wasn't even thinking about this part of it, that in their R&D process, that's a good point. I was kind of thinking afterwards, but it's an important thing to bring up to them, maybe, developers, operators, entrepreneurs. What kind of, in the testing that you've seen, what kind of mistakes have operators made, founders have made, that they just, they didn't know until you pointed it out, or common mistakes, I know earlier in the days before, the emulsion, or if they don't get the emulsion right, one of the problems before we knew about the can liners, we had all the cannabinoids sticking to the side, or the floating creme on the top kind of thing. So those are the ones I heard about. Now we've moved into better, but there's a lot of new entrepreneurs out there that aren't even thinking about this kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing I want to bring up. This is what you have to think about. These are the kind of mistakes you can make.
Yeah, no. So, great segue. So ultimately, coming from Eurofins and Vertosa, I saw how hard it was to make cannabinoids behave reliably in a beverage. And now at Act Lab, I see the other side. How do we verify that what was designed in R&D still holds up in real world production, with packaging, storage, distribution, and real world? That can liner situation floating to the top, that's exactly what I recognized early at Eurofins to help design the emulsion for Vertosa. We had the can liner issue ultimately came through me, where CVS, we have products that had 10 milligrams of CBD on it, and it reported out, tested the liquid itself, it wasn't there. And we had to take a next step, which was called an acid wash, where we took an acid wash of the can liner to extract the cannabinoids from there. And we're like, oh, okay, someone did put them in, but they got absorbed by the can liner. And at that time, it was with this company, and this is the international aspect, Vita Coco. A lot of people don't remember it, but Vita Coco launched a hemp beverage back in 2018, 2019. The Farm Bill at that time did not allow them to sell it in the US. So they distributed this through Poland and throughout the rest of the EU. So this was my claim to fame, is that I got a big CPG company infused by Vertosa, and ultimately leveraged that to raise funds for Vertosa and say, hey, this is going to get big. And then the next one I was able to capture was PBR, which gave us more foundation to go into our Series A and continue this journey that we had been on since 2019. So those original problems on stability and can liners were solved during my time at Vertosa, particularly for big CPG brands that needed them, like Vita Coco and PBR. Now, to your question, specifically, where are hemp beverages really creating testing challenges in R&D that labs haven't historically had to solve for? For me, I look at this as hemp beverages definitely create different testing challenges because, number one, cannabinoids are oil-based ingredients. and they're being delivered in a water-based product. And everyone knows, oil and water doesn't mix. So that makes formulation, emulsion stability, homogeneity, shelf life, behavior very, very critical. Traditionally, it's important to call out with flour or concentrates, you're mostly testing a relatively stable matrix. But with beverages, the question is not only how much THC or CBD is in the product today, is it evenly distributed throughout the liquid? Does the potency stay consistent over time? Meaning if it's 10 milligrams in September, will it be 10 milligrams in May after it gets through distribution, retailer inventory, and shelving? Does the emulsion stay stable, making sure it doesn't break, float to the top, sink to the bottom, adhere to the can liners? Does the cannabinoids, and this is the key piece in innovation, does the cannabinoids interact with other ingredients? And so as people innovate and try to differentiate beyond just delta-9 THC, they're including minor cannabinoids like CBN, CBC, CBG, but they're also, including very sexy ingredients like L-theanine, caffeine, ashwagandha, lion's mane, all these awesome nutraceuticals that I get excited about. But from a chemistry standpoint, that does cause interactions. And, I learned early on, both at Vertosa and now at ACT Lab, that those other ingredient components can cause interference that we have to solve for. And the emulsion solves for that, but also the R&D formulation solves for that. And then the other bit is the packaging piece. And we talk about can liners, but not all can liners are the same. And some of the state regs require or exclude certain can liners. For example, in California, you got to be BPA free. So you have to use a BPA-NI type of can liner. Consumers don't know this, of course, but it's a Prop 65 requirement. But in other states, like in the Midwest, you can use a BPA liner. And the two different liners are critical to any entrepreneur because there are cost differences, there are supply chain interactions, there are regulatory considerations. Hey, am I going to be, moving this product through California, or am I going to be moving this product through the South? And you have to know as an entrepreneur which can liner you can use, and the can liner will inherently interact with the emulsion, but also those other ingredients. Because even things like not just cannabinoids, but there's a good case study from years ago on Monster Energy drink on, some of their B vitamins adhering to can liner. And Monster Energy drink had to solve that. So if you're going to be putting cannabinoids and B vitamins for energy, and you're going to use maybe like THCV plus B12, then your can liner becomes critically important. And not only your formulation becomes critically important, but everything that is centered in that formulation has got to be compliant with the state that is going to be distributed to. So it's a complex world, no doubt about it. But, I look at this like very simply as, is the first sip consistent with the last sip? And that becomes very important, especially when you're thinking about something that is psychoactive that's going to develop a feeling. There's a saying back in the day we used to use, the old school cannabis beverages were like cannabis Russian roulette. You didn't know what you were going to get on the first sip. But if you get the formulation right, if you consider all the components, the actives, the functional ingredients, the beverage type, the can liner, and everything, you want it to be stable throughout because you want that first sip to be consistent with the last sip. And so for me, as a leader at ACT Lab, I ask the question, and I like to say, a hemp beverage is not just a compliant sample. It's a live product system. The cannabinoids, the emulsion, the beverage base, the package, and time all interact. And we have to know that you have to consider that as an entrepreneur. You have to consider all those components to launching a shelf-stable, scalable, reliable product.
And is it time and heat that might be the cause of, in the distribution process that might degrade the product? The emulsion obviously keeps it somewhat stable, right? But how about when, where do you find it falls off, for shelf stability?
That's all dependent on a few factors. And great question. Time and heat, yes, absolutely play the biggest contribution, but also oxygen. So because Delta 9 or cannabinoids as a whole, but particularly THC, is very susceptible to oxidation versus its counterpart, CBD, which is more chemically inert. So, different cannabinoids have different relationships with oxygen. If you've ever, consumed cannabis, the traditional form, by smoking it, if you ever had, the old school folks will say, if you ever had old weed, have you ever just, or have you ever smoked old weed and just gotten tired? Well, I can tell you why that is. The reason is because over time, the psychoactive cannabinoid Delta 9 converts to the cannabinoid CBN, and that's because of oxidation. So all cannabinoids start as CBG, and then as the plant matures, it breaks off into CBD or Delta 9 THC. That curve, though, on Delta 9 is an oxidation curve, where Delta 9 can become CBN over a longer period of time. And that CBN is a cannabinoid that is known to support sleep. So the question becomes, is the product in a hemp beverage susceptible to oxygen and oxygen change? The first rule of thumb is the emulsion itself creates a barrier to help protect it, no doubt about it. But there are elements in beverage production which help to prevent oxidation inside the beverage. And it's a key thing in evaluating a beverage manufacturer, which is a nitrogen push. So what they'll do, they'll fill up a beverage like this can to the top, all the way top, but there's always a little bit of room. And that little bit of room on top is a nitrogen seal. So good manufacturers put that nitrogen seal on it to protect oxidation. And that becomes the most critical role, because over time, it's that oxidation that converts Delta 9 THC into a different cannabinoid, CBN. And that experience of Delta 9 is very different than the experience of CBN. One may be more euphoric. The other may just encourage you to go night-night.
Right. So, but how would it oxidize without air getting in there or light? If it's a sealed can sitting on a shelf once it's done.
Because if you don't do that nitrogen push, you already got oxygen in the can. That's why. If you don't do that one step becomes so critical. So if you fill the can,
that air at the top, or even any
little bit, that little bit can cause interference.
Oh, so really it has to be is that nitrogen flushing? That's what they call it, right?
Yeah, I think you call it nitrogen flush, nitrogen push.
Nitrogen push, you said. Okay. Yeah.
So you'll create that layer right on top. That's why it's so hard to get into this space. So early on, folks that were we didn't have infrastructure for cannabis beverages or hemp beverages. And so you had a bunch of entrepreneurs jump into beverage manufacturing. But if you don't come from traditional beverage manufacturing, you may not know those, tips of the trade. And that's what was causing a lot of issues early on. But now that more mature operators have gotten involved in this space, and that's the beauty around the hemp D9 space, is that you saw, as a beverage person, you saw a decline in alcohol consumption. And in many markets here recently, there's been a crash of the craft brew industry or craft beer industry. So those folks had to pivot, and they saw hemp D9 as a very obvious pivot. More cannabis consumption, more people that are Cali sober, more younger generations and older generations reducing alcohol consumptions, but they still wanted something to feel. And that's where you saw in the Minnesota experiment, the Texas experiment, all these craft breweries starting to manufacture hemp D9 beverages. And that enabled a more mature infrastructure to start to run these hemp D9 beverages through, that maturity of that infrastructure allowed for quicker production and more scalable production because they already had the knowledge and the know-how to develop a beverage. They just had to make sure to get the R&D and formulation right with cannabinoids instead of alcohol.
Okay, well, let's go. So distribution, we already are the manufacturer, just like you said, put, nitrogen pushing, that's like a big red flag if they're not doing that, or potential problem. How about some of these new emulsion places that really don't understand cannabinoids, and like you were saying, every cannabinoid has a different relationship. What would be some of the problems that they could be doing unknowingly, I guess, would be in manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that's the beauty of cannabis as a whole, is that the reason why I'm in this space is not only because the products, but it's the people behind the products. And cannabis as a whole is a very welcoming industry. And so, we welcome folks from other traditional industries, pharma, CPG, traditional marketing and retail, to come into this space because there's so much that we can learn. For example, at Vertosa, Harold, the chief science officer, he came from traditional pharma. And it's that expertise that he had in taking, specifically, it was orange oils, so literally citrus oils, and putting them into a beverage. And so welcome anyone from traditional industries into cannabis, because there's so much that we can learn.
Absolutely.
But the emulsion itself, the interaction in cannabinoids, has to go through a lot of scientific rigor. And the mistakes that are typically made by folks that are trying to develop emulsions themselves, but without some of that more traditional pharma kind of background and emulsion creation, are really centered around stability. And there, I think, can be a lot of hubris for chemists that aren't specialized in surface chemistry. So there is a traditional type of chemistry specific around emulsion creation, which is surface chemistry. And surface chemists understand those interactions better than others. I would say, typically, though, a cannabis testing lab is someone that can help support anyone, regardless of their maturity in this space or their knowledge in this space, to help ensure better formulation. And it's my opinion that labs as a whole should be brought in earlier as product quality and risk reduction partners, not just final compliance checkpoints. And that's inclusive of the emulsion providers, the brand, the formulators, because the best beverage brands should work with labs during, number one, R&D formulation, ingredient qualification, inclusive of the emulsion, pilot batches, the shelf life studies are critical, packaging selection, stability studies over time, scale up of formulas, because we know some of the things that can create interference, the pre-launch verification, you got to get it right before you launch, and then ongoing batch monitoring, because that's what the distributors are going to want. They're going to want to know that, hey, brand A, if I bring on this product and it's going to take me 6 months, 12 months to move it, I need to make sure that experience at the 12-month mark is the same at month one. So
they're going to ask, these are kind of some of the stuff you should be prepared for to produce to them, not like when you're not too late.
Yeah, you have to have there's a dossier. So when we worked with Vita Coco, we had to have an entire dossier of verifications, of certifications, of stability studies. And the other bit that folks don't talk about enough, but there are two companies. One's Caliper, one is Vertosa, that has actually taken the next step and invested a ton of money in PK studies. And PK studies are pharmacokinetic studies where you're actually studying the bioavailability of the emulsion, i.e., how much is being absorbed into your body so that you can create that feeling. And that is a very expensive investment that has to be made, but it's also the scientific validation that says, hey, if I'm going to spend on this emulsion ingredient, I know that I have greater bioavailability, greater absorption of the cannabinoids. And those PK studies go a super long way at developing brand trust and consumer trust. And so that's another different type of lab than us, but another lab that should be considered in this type of development, or at least as a brand or an entrepreneur, a question that you can ask an emulsion provider is, do you know your bioavailability? How? Did you do a PK study? Can you show me the PK study? And that element in itself is just like, again, I'm from Missouri, the show me state. So it's like, show me the data and you can see the actual bioavailability. And I know that obviously, I did it at Vertosa, but I know competitors of Vertosa or collaborators even, like Caliper, who developed Ripple, they developed the PK study as well. And that is testimony to the emulsion actually working.
Yeah, but that kind of leads to the question that I've been wondering about, and I don't know if we really know yet, is how do terpenes react when you ingest them? I spoke to a scientist up in Western Washington University who's actually doing this research, and he's been given grants for it and whatever. And I did reach out to him, and he says, I just don't know yet. I'm like, he's in the middle. He just started this whole study, and terpenes is one of them. But, then you have other people like Dr. Russo, Ethan Russo, who's, made claims to it. And, IBNA is doing science. I mean, they're in-depth scientific research, well respected, and they claim. So anyway, I'm just curious from the lab perspective, is there anything you would say about the efficacy of terpenes? And should we stay away from any, are there some terpenes that, you know, don't work well in beverages or things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. The terpene question is something that is centered around innovation. And so we know in the traditional cannabis flower and some of the concentrate matrices that it is the terpene profile that helps to create a unique experience strain to strain. And that's where I see innovation happening in the beverage format, first and foremost, because Delta 9 by itself creates a specific experience, but Delta 9 inclusive of different terpenes can help design a completely different euphoric experience, but also a taste experience. And so that's been the hardest thing in beverage is because adding terpenes inherently adds a big impact on taste. And that becomes very challenging in formula because originally consumers or brands were pushing us to design beverages that were flavor neutral. They wanted to taste like Kool-Aid. They wanted to taste like a seltzer.
Yeah, well, that's
and
all
it's
that's
hard.
yeah, the
That's all
flavors.
that's there.
Yeah, that's all that's there. Yeah, no complex flavors.
And that's the key word, complexity and maturity and adult beverages. And so there have been some, I remember I originally launched this beverage, which is Harmony Craft Beverage. Now it's part of the Iconic Tonics Snoop Dogg brand.
Oh, yeah. I spoke to them too. Yeah, yeah.
Great. So, that we launched that originally. I'm a advisor there and shareholder, and I wanted to lean in on terps. I wanted to, create a more complex adult beverage. Another brand that's done it well is Klaus.
Yes.
That's
Oh,
Lauren Barbaro's product.
I preach his brand all the time.
Good.
I buy his. I love that. It's in my. I'm in the New York market. It's in my market, and the only thing I don't like about it is too sugar heavy for me. But
Yes.
but that's just But the flavors are so delicious. I
I
just
mean,
love it.
Warren's a superstar mixologist. I'm like you, I like low sugar, no sugar, type of application. But to get to your specific question, efficacy of terpenes, it is the manufacturers, Ebna, Abstracts, Terpene Belt Farms, True Terpenes, that could better deliver information on the actual efficacy. Anecdotally, what I can say is that terpenes help to design the cannabis experience. There are plenty of PubMed articles out there on terpenes like linalool that's used in traditional beverage as well as in cosmetics and ingestibles that help to promote relaxation. So linalool is that terpene that's in lavender, as an example, and so you are going to get more of a sedative effect, from it. That is one that people are looking for and utilizing a lot in both the beverage and cosmetic industry, but it has such that botanical flavor that you have to design, around it. But I liken it to something like gin. If people are a gin drinker, they like high botanical notes. That's what
Yeah.
you can design. You can design adult beverages. You don't need to design, Kool-Aid and high sugary beverages all the time. This is supposed to be a 21 and up adult beverage. So, lean
Right.
into the complexity. But consumers have to get there, brands have to get there, and it's baby steps. It's baby steps.
Yeah. And the consumer is just trying to get caught up to whatever we have yet. So I understand the economics of getting just a simple beverage into the market. So I'm excited about. I've been talking to people also about maybe terpenes. A terpene only drink will be kind of the plan B for everybody with this November 12th deadline coming if the hammer really comes down. It's not going to be it's not going to be the same because you don't get the high. And that's what really, why CBD, I feel like fell flat, there's no,
Yes.
that's what happened there. So anyway, so we'll see, but I've always been a fan of like, when are we going to get to the terpenes? But you explained it really well. About how they all work and everything. And so then I know I was looking through, you talked about, I was looking through some of your posts on LinkedIn and you were talking about how about revenue leakage, that these are some areas of revenue leakage. Failed batches, retesting cycles, delayed launches, and inconsistent data that creates downstream risk. Okay.
Yeah, I got you. So I'll tell you this: as a testing operator, here's what's the most important to brands. So the question you want to ask is, what should a brand do before launching a hemp beverage? Because at the end of the day, they're launching a beverage to drive consumer demand, but to make money. We're all businesses are supposed to, their report card is their P&L, right? So how much money did it make? Did it make margin? Was it profitable? How many people did it reach? How big was the impact? From a testing perspective, I tell brands to slow down early so they can move faster later. So before launch, they should validate no matter what, cannabinoid input quality, emulsion compatibility, batch homogeneity, that's critical, potency accuracy, package compatibility, shelf stability, microbial safety, contaminant profile, and production repeatability. The very, very, very expensive mistake is treating the lab like a final gate instead of an early partner. And so for me, I look at this as the best time to find a formulation problem is before you scale. Because like Warren's example, you can have a very complex beverage, mixologist style beverage, but sometimes you can't scale that. So that is the most expensive time is after the product is already in market and you realize you had a formulation problem that you could have prevented if you just would have slowed down early. So you got all that correct and scale up was more available instead of making mistakes and finding out after the fact. Because when it's after the fact, it's recall risk, it's brand risk, it's reputational risk with the distributors. Because if you fail 6 months later or your cans start exploding in a retailer shelves, oh, forget about it. Your lights out and you end up being bankrupt.
It's just something you don't think of, when you're probably going into production. So, that's great. I feel like we've covered everything. I think maybe the only other thing, unless you think I've forgotten something, I would just like to know maybe what you think just from maybe where you think the next year is going as far as flavors? Because you like beverages, obviously, or, I don't know, maybe just kind of forward thinking, maybe if there's any thoughts that come out, like, how about rosin resin based formulations? Is that anything? I mean, I feel like that's where you see the industry maturing when those products start coming in, distillate, and then all of a sudden the gummies are.
So yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm glad I was actually going to go there. So great minds
Oh,
think alike. We haven't seen. You're going to see it in hemp beverages. You're not going to see rosin and resins in hemp beverages because those are uniquely cannabis-based products. In hemp, what's happening, and I think it's important to call out, the only reason the hemp beverage market exists is because chemists figured out how to convert hemp CBD into Delta 9. And there can be safe conversions and there can be unsafe conversions. And the unsafe conversion, it's a conversation around chirality, where you have very similar carbon compounds, the THC molecule, very similar, but one is slightly blurred. And that blurred carbon compound and chirality and say unsafe conversions can create other contaminants. And so the way I see it, number one, is like, as I look forward for the hemp beverage market, it's all about creating consumer trust before we innovate, because we're taking the first step here. So and as a testing lab, my perspective in this marketing, talk about November 12th and this deadline, like we need to ask ourselves, how does the industry leverage testing to help build consumer trust? And I feel that as we look forward, not only in hemp beverage, but the greater ecosystem of food, beverage, and supplements, you hear about all these supplement brands failing contaminant tests, heavy metals, etc. They're asking for the data. They're asking to better understand what's in their product. They're asking, hey, is this product or brand something I can trust? So testing is a trust layer. In an emerging category like hemp beverages, consumers do not know what to believe. They see
yeah.
different labels, they see different milligram levels, they see different state rules, they see different claims. And so reliable testing helps create that confidence that the label is accurate, the product is not contaminated, the serving size is consistent, first sip, last sip, the product behaves as intended, and the brand is taking safety seriously. And so I think in a very fragmented market, testing truly becomes the common language of trust. Who's it tested by? Can I see the certificate of analysis? Do I feel this is an accurate representation of the brand and what I want to consume? So I then look at that and say, can we get that part right first? Like
Yeah.
that's what we have to all align on before we continue to innovate. Is we need to bring in consumer trust so we can allow this category to continue to evolve. And I would love to see the evolution and the inclusion of rosins, resins, other botanical extracts in these products. But those other botanical extracts also need to be tested. That's where the challenge is in even traditional CPG. You could have a brand with all the intent to develop, the best for you product, but if you don't test those individual components, you could be unknowingly contaminating your final product. And the issue is because even in traditional CPG, and you can probably watch enough Netflix documentaries and whatnot to show you that every part of like botanicals are tested at a different agency than the beverage, than the beer, than the supplements. It's all these different agencies, and we need to say, hey, y'all, let's just like consolidate this. Let's build
Yeah.
consumer trust. Let's get it. Let's get everyone under one framework so that we can continue to develop this category and build it up. I do see a lot of forward-looking opportunity. I think the reason rosin and resin is capturing people's attention is because it's considered a premium category in traditional cannabis dispensaries. So you got flower, from the economics, from a dollar per gram perspective, you got flower here, but the resin and the rosins are premium products. They have all of, especially rosin, they are not treat it with solvents, right? So this is solventless, which that's a contaminant. That's the biggest concern in cannabis is solvent. So they want rosin because it's solventless. Well, the rosin contains all the minor cannabinoids and all the beautiful terpenes that create and design that very unique experience. And so as I look towards the future, that's all people want to do with cannabis. That is the hypothesis that cannabis can create is we can design experiences. And we design those experiences with the utilization of cannabinoids, terpenes, and other functional ingredients. And so I have seen firsthand people, early movers, do things like L-theanine with CBN, with THCV, and other botanical extracts in a beverage. They were too early. They were 2019, right? And at that time, they wanted just to get high and in a seltzer. But now that that's starting to take traction, the future looks like how do we create a full day experience with cannabis products? Because you can do that. You can have a wake and bake type of beverage where you're using Delta 9 THCV, Delta 9 THCV, limonene as a terpene, and potentially caffeine as something to like jumpstart your day. You can have a midday type of beverage where maybe you have a low concentration of Delta 9 THC, a higher concentration of, say, CBG as an anti-inflammatory, and then include electrolytes in that beverage. And then you can have your nighttime beverage where maybe it's a chamomile tea with a linalool as a terpene and CBN, so that for its sedative effects. And I think that's what everyone's trying to go for is how do we design a full day experience? Because, hey, from a money making perspective, is that if I have a brand that gives me an opportunity to consume it in the morning, midday, and evening, I'm going to sell 3 units per day instead of 1 unit per day. But the challenge is how do I make it taste good? And how do I ensure that we're, capturing the full value and ensuring consumer safety in terms of quality, compatibility, homogeneity, accuracy, stability, safety, repeatability. Those are those challenges. But testing labs, ingredient manufacturers in this space have continued to figure them out and make that dream a possible reality.